Hey, everybody, welcome to another version of He's a Porn Addict Now What? I'm Joshua Shea. I'm with my partner here, Tony Overbay. He's a licensed marriage family therapist. I was an addict for 24 years with pornography. We wrote this book, and now we're giving it to you question by question in this podcast format. Lots of other information we want you to read in the notes, but we're not going to waste your time. We're going to get right into this today. The question we're looking at today is, this can't really be like other addictions, can it? Tony.
Here we go. Gosh, I love this so much because I forget a lot of the times what I said. So I'm giddy to see if I still believe what I said. So here we go. I said yes and no. The negative effects on an addict's outside life can range from very minimal to life-altering, regardless of the addiction. If you're missing work because you're putting a needle in your arm or playing video games, you're still missing work. Your addiction may get you fired, and it doesn't matter what the addiction is in this case. On a cellular level, drugs and alcohol will obviously cause negative physical effects to your body simply because that kind of addiction is introducing foreign chemicals to the body. On a dopamine level, it's the same, but different. The dopamine surge that comes with playing a video game is on the same level as somebody who is craving a piece of pizza and then gets it, based on the research that I've looked at. There's a reward given to the pleasure centers of the brain by satisfying that urge. The dopamine rush from something like heroin or cocaine is 10 times that of a video game, even for the addict. I would guess that pornography is somewhere in the middle. Now, the problem with addiction is that dopamine hit. Whether it was a giant one with heroin or a tiny one with Fortnite on an Xbox, quickly dissipates. Over time, you need to blast those neuroreceptors in the brain with even more of whatever it is that's giving you pleasure, because the amount of dopamine that once gave you pleasure doesn't quite cut it anymore. So I don't want anybody reading this to think, well, at least he's not addicted to crack or meth as a way of justifying or minimizing pornography addiction. You probably wouldn't be 10 times worse if he was doing that. Conversely, you're not 10 times worse than you would be if he was, quote, only addicted to video games. Or are you? So this is one of those questions that I urge people not to get too attached to in terms of measuring the true cost of their partner's addiction. As I'll state throughout this book, repeated viewing of pornography warps one's sexuality. It takes away from an opportunity to truly connect with a spouse, a partner, at a level that so many men believe does not even exist. A level where they are fully present with the person in front of them and not thinking about or needing pornographic images in order for them to be intimate with their partner. Okay, gosh, I believe that I still back that up, and I can't wait to talk about more. But first, your thoughts. What did you say? How did you answer this one?
I answered this. It wasn't until I was well into my second stint at inpatient rehab that I started to believe that not only were my alcoholism and porn addiction actual diseases, but I was not all that different from the people who had addiction to things I had no issues with, like heroin or gambling. I came to accept the fact that I have an addictive personality. There are plenty of reasons and theories as to how I got here, but I don't think the 10-year-old kid who had to finish the Zelda video game faster than any of his friends, or who had nearly 250,000 baseball cards by age 14, was all that different than the guy who found solace in Red Bull and tequila, or on a computer screen featuring naked women 2 decades later. If there were hardcore drug addicts in my life, I never knew it. When I got to the first rehab center in Palm Springs, California to deal with my alcoholism, I was met with people who I would honestly have crossed the street to avoid. They were dirty and made bad choices. They didn't have the moral willpower that I did. I knew how to say no to crack and meth. Being forced into an environment with all of these people, I came to recognize I had more in common with them than the people who I rubbed shoulders with in the real world I left behind. These people knew pain, were master manipulators, and found a way to soothe the demons that raged inside of them. Their demons were usually similar to mine, even if our coping mechanisms were not. I used alcohol and pornography interchangeably. Obviously, if I was at a professional social function, I couldn't access pornography on my phone, so I'd drink up. If I was alone at home, the computer was always there to fill a need. Late at night, when my wife and kids were fast asleep, I could engage both of my addictions. There are obvious differences in the legality of substances, and drugs will do other harmful things to hurt the body, but I truly believe addiction is addiction is addiction. My fight these days is just as much about not falling into another addiction as it is staving off the ones I've identified. Recovery includes learning not to engage with new behaviors and substances.
Man, Josh, okay, I feel like I want to jump right into interview mode as I really appreciate that. Have you heard that concept of we're all addicts of some form and it's a matter of trying to find a healthier
Yeah,
or socially acceptable addiction? What are your thoughts?
absolutely. Well, as I tell, all of the people who I coach now, is that addiction is just a label, like we talked about in a few earlier
Yeah.
podcasts. And, you know how you feel. You know exactly how you feel. And if you're asking yourself, do I have an addiction? You probably have some type of problem. Now, does it rise to the white lab coat definition of addiction? Who cares? Who cares? There's a problem there.
Yeah.
There's a problem there, whether it's a habit or whether it's a compulsion or whether it's an addiction. These are all just words. You could tell me these words in German. You could tell me these words in Chinese, and I'd have no idea what you're saying because I don't
Yeah.
speak those languages. So, what does it matter? I'm still the same person. That was one of the real things I had to learn about addiction was that it's not like, oh, I have a cold. Oh, I have neck pain. I have backaches. So here is the prescribed solution.
Mhm.
With mental health, it took me a very long time to understand who cares what these labels are. You have to go
Yeah.
with how you feel, you have to go with your symptoms, you have to manage the behaviors and the symptoms that you have. And if you want to put it all under a nice umbrella and put everything into a box and label it porn addiction, fine. You want to label it alcoholism, fine. Whatever your symptoms are into this box, label it however you want. That's kind of the point that I've reached now because
Yeah.
everybody, I think addiction is, it's not a word of black and white, it's a word of
Mm.
gray. And you have to determine for yourself, based on what the 10 or 11 symptoms of addiction are, how many fall for you, how many fall into your world, and if you're going to do anything about it. Because if you're not going to do anything about it either way, what's it matter what you're called?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it's interesting. I know you do coaching. I've got an online program called The Path Back. And we were talking in my group last night of that people have used the similar principles in the group. And I'm sure people could use your coaching techniques to deal with eating too many cookies, as silly as that sounds,
Yeah.
or being a workaholic. So I like what you're saying. If it's a problem, then you bet. I know we've said that before, whatever you need to call it. We're trying to sound dismissive of that. I will tell you, this is the part too where I worry at times where I'm saying to someone, I know how you feel, but for 20 something years, I did ultra marathon running, which is distances of over 26 miles. I would run, I don't know, 10, I feel it sounds silly, but the 10 to 12, 13 miles a morning. And then I would do these 100-mile races. And I did a fundraiser in my community where I'd run 24 hours around a track to raise money for the schools. So all that sounds amazing, but I have to tell you that if I went a day without running, I immediately felt, and I would joke about this later, shorter, fatter, balder, and I was a worse husband, therapist, and father. And it sounded like I was making a joke, but it was difficult to not turn to that feel good drug of choice. It just happened to be
Right.
socially acceptable. And at
Right.
one point, I broke my ankle. I rolled it, and I was supposed to give myself 8 to 10 weeks. And after 4 weeks, I said I have to run, and I'll just be really careful. And I remember in hindsight now thinking that was really really dumb. But after 4 weeks, I'd gained a tremendous amount of weight. I had gone to this pretty dark place, and I realized, oh, this is a problem. You know, it's just
Yeah.
so one would think at least that's a healthier addiction, but man, it is an unhealthy coping mechanism or something that you turn to and feel worse when you are not doing that. I do think that we can throw that in that bucket too.
Absolutely. And another thing I'd like to add is that since we wrote this book,
Mhm.
obviously you and I have done a lot more learning about this,
Yes.
and science has moved forward since this. And I have read in multiple places at this point that when you look at the exact amounts of dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin
Yeah.
and endorphins and all those fun things up in the brain that gets secreted when we are giving into our addiction or engaging in our favorite activity, because it's
Right.
a fine line between engaging in an activity and being completely addicted, as you just mentioned. As far as the, I guess you'd call it a chemical compound that gets secreted, that is created in your brain. Pornography is the closest thing, or the closest thing that they can find to the pornography addiction high is that of cocaine.
Yeah, I
And
have read
I've
that.
seen
You're
this in
absolutely right.
multiple places in the
Yeah.
last few years. So when people think, oh my God, why can't you just stop looking at pornography? Why can't you just, put it away? You don't have to look at it. Walk away from the computer, put your phone down. Well, you would never just say, well, just put the mirror down, just put the rolled up dollar bill down to
Yeah.
a cocaine addict, because that's, maybe it's because it's illegal. Maybe it's because we all got scared in school about this kind of drug. The secretions of the chemicals that we're going after are so close. I think that puts into perspective for a lot of probably non-users or people who are just having trouble quitting, that this is like trying to quit cocaine addiction. It's that big a deal.
Yeah, because how many times you run into your clients? I know the people that I'm working with that every single time is the last time. I mean, this is it.
Yeah.
This is, and that's,
Yeah.
and if you start looking at that's the adorable way that your brain is going to get you to the next hit is then saying, okay, this is it. I get it now, and I will not do this again. And that gives you the justification to use. And then here comes that shame. And then a couple days later, okay, I haven't really done anything to work through what I'm dealing with. So then I feel worse. And then I know my brain says, well, I know how to make you feel better. And I promise this is the last time.
Right.
And how many
Well,
times, right? Yeah.
and I tell you, the amount of, not just in people who I will coach, I see this more with people who leave comments on my social media pages, is that I'm going for 7 days. I went for a full month. Okay, what did you do on day 8? What did you do that next day of the month? I celebrated by using. Well, then
Yeah.
why did you try stopping? I'm going for 100 days. Great. What happens on day 101?
I
That's
get to
kind of one of
celebrate,
these things.
right?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
celebrate by engaging. You're giving yourself
Yeah.
that
No,
treat.
you're
And
right.
such a weird phenomenon, the no masturbation November, which is a big thing among
Yeah.
younger people. And it's like, that's fantastic. These websites see a giant spike on December
Oh.
1st because, okay, I did it. Now what? Well, I'll just go back to it because now I can quit for a month whenever I need to.
Had a book about porn in the pandemic, right? I mean, it's like
Yeah.
I feel like that people do just find whatever reason or way they can to just say, "Well, I'm inside. It's a pandemic. What am I going to do? As soon as this thing's over, then I'll work on it." Or I like what you're saying about, "Well, I made it through November, so now I am back to my normal routine. But at least I can do it now. I can tell myself that. I mean, if I really need to, I can put a month of sobriety." I hear that one
Yeah.
often, where people say, "Well, when I really am going to have to do this, now I know I can." But that's again, those are all stories your brain's just telling you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on the bonus content today, you reminded me of a couple of things. One of the things we can talk about is I like what you were saying about in the answer where the kid playing Zelda or collecting baseball cards that would never have imagined where you were at now. And I've got a concept that I did a podcast about recently on my virtual couch podcast about from this book called The Buddha Brain, which is the neuroscience of happiness. And it really is this concept around what's called intrinsic memories and how really, and this is where I'm not trying to sound dramatic, but all of our experiences start to paint this neural network of what it feels like to be you. And so, and I feel like some people either hear that and they think, oh my gosh, so I'm a horrible person. Or when you notice you are wanting or thinking or craving, then if you do something, then you're starting to slowly but surely change that little neural landscape. So maybe we can talk about that. And I want to hear more about how 250,000 baseball cards, Josh. We got to talk about that.
Yeah. I had a closet. If you opened it up, there were long, long boxes and then long, long boxes like this, literally just straight up the entire closet and stuff that I would never even look at them. I sold a lot of them when I was 17, 18, and I assume that they're all still in my parents' basement somewhere. They're not worth anything these days, the way that they were back when I started collecting. But yeah, I can look through my entire life and see multiple times where I got obsessed with things and
I
I
would
would
love
get
to see. Yeah.
obsessed with a different thing.
Talk about
All
that and
right.
so much more over on the bonus episode. So, all
Sounds
right,
great.
Josh, see you on the other side.
Absolutely.